Hi, and welcome to another episode of eCom at One. Today's guest is Stephen Kenwright, Chief Commercial Officer and co-founder of Rise at 7. How are you doing, Stephen?
Really good, Richard. How about yourself?
I am very good, very good. We were just saying, I'm back in the office this week on a bit of a semi-permanent basis, which is always good. Seems like it's been a long time coming, but yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Yeah, really pleased to get you on the podcast. I had a few questions from the team as well. Obviously, I know you've got a lot of stuff going on there at Rise at 7. And I'm really excited to sort of step through a few things. A lot of our listeners are looking for growth, and that's something that I know you're very familiar with in your own business, in a big way in the last couple of years, but also obviously in clients, projects and clients that you've worked with over the years. So I think let's get straight into it. So I know you're sort of 2 years and a bit into the Rise at 7 journey, but I think it'd be good to tell the listeners, that where you made the jump from full-time employment to setting up the agency. Tell me about that.
It was never planned. It wasn't an intentional thing to start an agency. And I'd always historically been dead against it, actually. I never thought it would be my scene. But I made the decision to leave my old agency quite a while before that, and I wanted to go in-house. I'd been married for a little while, and we were thinking of starting a family, and having done a lot of conferences and general client meetings and so on, and eventually just living in a hotel for 3 days a week, I decided I don't want to go in-house because at least I would be in one place all the time. So I joined Pendragon PLC back at the beginning of 2019 to head up all of their digital stuff, for want of a better term. And lots of change going on generally in that sector. Brexit definitely hit that one faster than it's hit most of us now, as well as just generally the automotive sector being in a bunch of turmoil. So it just didn't really work out. And after having tried to hire Carrie, my co-founder, a bunch of times at Pendragon and saying no, the shoe was on the other foot eventually, and she asked me to set something up with her. And the rest is history.
I didn't realize that. So you were trying to get her to come and work with you at Pendragon, and then she pulled you away to set up your own thing. Oh, wow.
One of the curious things about, I think what a lot of clients are experiencing right now. So there is an enormous boom in digital PR, which is one of the things that's really accelerating our growth.
Yeah.
And at Pendragon, the marketing team was enormous. It was like 98 people in marketing. There was 34 in digital, and I was fortunate in my position being basically overseer of SEO and PPC, but also PR, social, content, development, plenty of ready access to designers as well. So all of the ingredients to do a great digital PR campaign, but absolutely no way of dragging everyone away from their day-to-day to actually do it, because I'm not a practitioner. So unless you have someone who is absolutely confident in how to pull a digital PR campaign together, even if you have the people, they've got to be all willing to try something new and potentially fail at it. And when a business is the size of Pendragon, with like 30 different marks that they're working with every day, like Ford and Vauxhall, etc., all the way through to 270 dealerships. Like it's a busy environment. No one wants to make that jump. So my thought process was, if I bring Carrie on board, she could be the spearhead of actually making it happen, but obviously not to be.
So obviously 2 years down the line, or 2 years and a bit, I think we'll come back to the journey piece. But I think I know a lot of we talk a lot about SEO and PPC on the podcast, but I think technical SEO is something that quite often gets overlooked personally, and I think I think it'd be good for us to talk about that for a bit. So why do stores need to focus on that technical element, would you say?
Well, e-commerce sites generally are probably the sites that need to focus on technical SEO the most, because there is such a degree of complexity that isn't present in most other sectors. So we do lots of financial services, for example, and it's relatively straightforward to do SEO, technical SEO and financial services. You've got to worry about the whole your money or your life stuff and making sure that information's accurate, but it's a content problem, not a technical problem. Whereas e-commerce websites have got however many SKUs you've got, times however many variants of those SKUs, times by how many landing pages you want. Maybe you've got stores. So there is an infinite number of possibilities of pages just to exist. And finding that balance between having all of the pages that you should have and not having more pages than you need is a uniquely e-commerce challenge. And that whole concept around crawl equity and making sure that things are easy for Google to access is so much more prevalent in e-commerce than literally any other sector that I can think of.
Yeah. I think, there's obviously a lot more to it, isn't there? As we know, so many, maybe 100,000 SKUs as opposed to, 30 service pages or whatever it may be. Or so maybe step us through, I know our listeners will be like, right, well, what sort of things should we be doing? What sort of things should we be looking at? So, maybe step us through a project. If you can name names, name them. If not, that's okay. Where you've sort of gone through that technical audit piece, maybe, and then implemented X, Y, Z, the sort of things you look for, maybe the sort of tool set that you use in-house or you use personally, to see where the problems may be, and then the sort of fixes that you've implemented, and then potentially the results if you can share them on a particular project.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll go back to Pendragon for a sec and talk about Car Store, which was, we called it an MVP when we launched it. So it was one of the kind of unique challenges in e-commerce when you've got CMS to consider, for example, is you've got some that are built for e-commerce that have crap content pages, and you've got some that are built for content with crap e-commerce pages, and not very many that do both. So Car Store is an example of a website that has built for content. It was a Sitecore CMS, and we'd custom built an e-commerce engine made out of JavaScript for the cars. And this is, launched in probably the end of 2018, so just before my time at Pendragon. And the concept of Car Store is it's a used car supermarket. So similar to Evans Halshaw, but instead of being Evans Halshaw Ford, Evans Halshaw Vauxhall, whatever, it is just all used cars. And, you have the same kind of similar kind of store experience, but going down that route of we're not pushy, we're here to help. We'll, take you on a test drive. And if you say, I don't fancy that, we'll go, all right, no worries, leave you to get on with your day, rather than what some of the old car dealerships of old had the reputation for doing. And the kind of launch program for Car Store, there were a couple of custom built dealership premises, but a lot of them were just underperforming Evans Halshaw premises that had kind of been transformed into Car Store premises. But what was a little bit different about Car Store was that it was the first time in the UK that you could buy a used car using a credit card on a website and get delivered somewhere.
Yeah. And
the mechanism behind the scenes to make that happen with just the APIs connecting into the delivery company that takes the car from A to B, that links up with the dealer principal's calendar to tell that person that, the customer is coming to collect this car that's arriving at this time, and it needs to be cleaned, and then this customer's arriving at this time. All of that's automated. And the really sort of cool thing about it was the link between when a person arrived on the website and bought a car through to, the service stuff that comes a couple of years later. We could trace a service back to a keyword that someone had searched years earlier. Yeah. So all of that, incredibly cool. However, built in JavaScript, 5,000 cars disappeared overnight when we moved them to the Car Store shop.subdomain, because they just couldn't be rendered. And it was due to the kind of JavaScript framework that was used to build the Car Store site, basically. So when I first started at Pendragon, it was kind of a bit of a weird sort of, not lack of understanding, but a kind of acceptance that it's a brand new website and it's going to take a while to rank. And therefore it's okay that we aren't getting a lot of traffic to these pages because it's only 3 months old. Yeah. However, that's fine. You shouldn't expect to get traffic to a brand new website within sort of 3 months of any kind of meaningful traffic anyway. But you should get indexed. You should get those pages crawled. You should get them listed in Google, especially if they were pages that were indexed on the evanshalshaw.com website and that have just been transferred over. So the kind of process went through a technical audit, which was, I used Deep Crawl at the time, still fond of Deep Crawl. Other crawlers are available though, but Deep Crawl with the JavaScript rendering engine on it particularly, and Search Console. Search Console is the most valuable and possibly underrated technical SEO tool on the market.
Agreed.
And that really gives you the view of what's actually happening with a website. But the way that we kind of actioned that audit was to break it down into work streams. So these kind of categorized, maybe there are 30 actions, but maybe that's actually 3 groups of 10 actions. So instead of fighting for this one thing to be done and see what happens next, it was, well, there is one problem here around indexing. So we need to do these 6 things to be able to get everything crawled and indexed. So that's going to be a sprint. We're going to do all of those things together. That has to be ticked off the list in one go. Otherwise, we'll never know if it worked or not, because there are still so many unknowns around actually getting the thing crawled and indexed. So we'd split it out that way. And, inevitably we've got things around site speed, which are becoming much more prevalent now. But, they were generally, we'd call them medium priority. In SEO, we don't like to have low priority things because we know they'll never get done. But, the high priority thing is get the thing indexed, and the medium priority is make it fast and make it more accessible. Yeah. So the result of that, and it was kind of a real different way of working in Pendragon, because historically the digital team had kind of had a recommendation ad hoc, something they'd spotted, they'd fire it over in an email to the web product team, who would either find a place for it in a sprint or forget about it forever. And it wasn't a lack of want from the web developers at all. It's not that web developers don't want to do it. The way that they're working is with an agile concept called epics, which basically means here is the defined scope of our work for the next 6 months, and nothing's going in there unless it fits very much in the scheme.
Even though your website's not indexed, yeah.
Yeah, it's because they've got these kind of different development teams who are working on very, very specific things. So the only way we got it done is to say, well, Car Store, the website, is now an epic. And to be able to do that, we need to define that scope of work. We need to say, this epic will end in 4 months' time. We're going to do these things. In 4 months, it will be finished. We'll have success criteria, which are the cars are indexed for one thing, but loads of other kind of technical benchmarks that we want to meet, like the site speed decreases from 7 seconds to 3 seconds and these kind of things. Yeah. But working with the developers to basically say, we know what needs to be done. This is a finite list of things that need to be done. Of course, there'll be more things, but they might not be the top priority for you straight after this. So we'll revisit them when we need to. But we know when these will be done. You're going to have your developers free again to do other things in October. So they can start planning, they can start thinking about how they're going to action some of the things that they want to action that are, other deprioritized projects, basically. And it's technical SEO is a kind of mixture of product management and brand management now. It's SEOs are people who connect people with other people mostly, or connect disciplines with other disciplines.
Yeah, it can be so challenging, can't it? You come into a project, and clearly you're seeing big technical problems, but obviously that education piece with that, or building that relationship with their technical team, if they've got 3 or 4 months worth of work already laid out, getting that point across, and obviously demonstrating that value of commercial change that's going to happen, likely to happen. So important, isn't it? As you just get, the SEO team want this doing, we'll put that on the list, sort of thing. Well, whereas if you can demonstrate or you can deliver, 5,000 SKUs aren't getting indexed, and then next week they are. Obviously, that's a huge win.
Yeah, one of the very strange but very positive things about e-commerce, like you can't do this with a legal website, for example, because a lawyer's a lawyer. They're going to be doing something or not doing something, and that's very ephemeral. But with an e-commerce website, you can go over to a dealership, you can take a photograph of a car, and you can say to your boss, no one in the world knows that this car exists. It's going to sit there on the forecourt, depreciating in value. Every single day is costing you money that you don't get this car indexed in Google. And all of a sudden, it's an epic and it's prioritized.
Yeah, it's getting that point across, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's where I guess a good bit of advice to technical SEOs listening, or the site owners, the teams that are listening, to obviously just sending a spreadsheet saying we need this doing, but obviously give it some context, give it some reality of cost, and you've got this 20, obviously cars are expensive. We've got clients that sell hot tubs. Well, 35 grand, I think, is a swim spa nowadays for a top of the range. Well, if it's not indexed, you aren't selling many, are you?
100%.
Yeah. So what was the outcome of that project then? I really like the idea of the sprints around the the crawl, the site speed. I think that's great, and chunking those maybe 4, 5, 6, 10 tasks within each one. I think that's a great bit of advice. But what was the what happened? It's like what was the outcome?
Well, we got all of the cars indexed in 2 weeks because we implemented pre-render.io to be able to render that JavaScript server side instead of client side, and that was basically all that was required. But it was very much a collaborative effort between us and the developers to say, this is what needs to happen. You are the experts that can tell us how to make it happen. And one of the difficult bits to navigate when you're a technical SEO is trying to know enough of what you're talking about to decide if it's going to work or not, but not knowing so much that you think you know more than developers. And you can go into a conversation with those really experienced devs and say, we need asynchronous JavaScript. And they go, what does that mean? And you go, don't know. I read it in Google's developer handbook stuff. So it's tricky, but that one was really straightforward. It's like a very.
So are you an actual? Are you a dev?
Not at all. No, I can't do development at all.
Same, absolutely same. Yeah, it's a whole other world, isn't it?
It is, but that's the point. It's like you should know why something needs to happen. But even experienced devs Google things and go on Stack Overflow. So it's not a mark of shame to not be able to code and still call yourself a technical SEO.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So worked on a lot of sites. That's Pendragon sort of 2.5, 3. Well, where are we? 3, 4 years ago, maybe 3, 4 years ago when you started that piece. Obviously, dozens, if not hundreds, of projects have gone by, and you're working on at the moment. What's the sort of common mistakes you see retailers, e-commerce stores making? Almost sort of time and time, you sort of, no doubt you get a new client or you're about to win a new client and you pull up your tool set and it's like, oh yeah, this, we won't say don't do site speed though, because we always talk about site speed.
You know what? Site speed is never the most important thing. It's always the easiest thing because you've got a time frame. You say you fix your site speed by this date or you've got a problem. There's no deadline for fixing other things, but there are a few things that always come up. I would say the first thing is faceted navigation. No one ever does faceted nav right, especially when a lot of the clients that we work with have a couple of different ways to navigate things in the catalog. So they might have a faceted nav that maybe is in Magento. They might have a product management system like Threadhopper or something like that. They might have all sorts of internal linking stuff going on as well. And you've got all these different bits of tech that generate their own URLs for stuff. You throw in, session IDs and dynamic URLs and all sorts of stuff within the faceted navigation itself. And it's just, I think probably the thing that we do more than anything else is block stuff that's caused by faceted nav. That's the main sort of, that's the common thing that's wrong. And one of the symptoms and reasons that it's such a big deal is developers recently have had this fascination and had this real kind of love for load more buttons instead of pagination.
Yeah.
And pagination in an e-commerce setting, it's difficult to deal with, but it's better. The load more button can be an absolute nightmare depending on how it's implemented. And if you're combining that load more that's hiding a bunch of SKUs and a faceted nav that's also generating its own URLs for SKUs, you're going to get all of the pages that you don't want to be indexed, and all the pages you do want to be indexed, not indexed. So that's really common as well, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. So for the guys listening, so obviously I think right at the beginning we talked about, how many pages have you got indexed? If you've got, 10,000 SKUs, and then you do you run the site through just a simple command and you see there's 50,000 pages indexed. Clearly there's 40,000 potentially that are problematic. And then the things you've ran through there are usually the culprits, is what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah,
pretty much. They're the two of the more common ones, definitely. And I think there's other really common stuff. It's going to be most, as I mentioned earlier, most e-commerce platforms are not good at content. They're good at e-commerce, but not good at content. So somewhere down the line, everyone's decided to have a blog.subdomain on WordPress. And one of the more common, I wouldn't call it a fix, but one of the more common opportunities we capitalize on is moving that into, whether it's even Magento's blog, if it's in a subfolder, tends to perform better than a WordPress blog.
Subdomain. Yeah.
That's really common. And just the kind of analysis early days of, well, it looks like a referrer in Google Analytics, right? Because it's a subdomain. And you compare that as a referrer versus social channels or PR or all these other referrers. And you generally tend to see that it refers at a higher rate with a better average order value and a higher conversion rate than any of your other channels, because they're people who are interested in your stuff. And then they click through and go through. So if you can capture more of that traffic, more people who are interested in your stuff, and also get better data on the other end of it because you know what they clicked on before that, it's a fairly easy win, even though it can be a bit of a complicated or time-consuming change to make.
Yeah, no, nice one. So I think quite a lot of our listeners, Magento, Shopify seems to be quite a common theme. Have you got any specifics technically on those platforms?
Shopify, I would say the number one thing to bear in mind with Shopify is if you've ever heard someone say Shopify is not set up well for SEO, then maybe forget that, because it's fine. Like it's a thing that gets repeated, like WordPress isn't secure. And if you question it, why isn't WordPress secure? Why isn't Shopify good for SEO? Often an answer. So, the platforms all have their limitations, and they aren't, their own, they aren't always unavoidable. They're not always things that can't be overcome once a website has gone live. I'd say Magento tends to have more URLs in it. That's a thing that happens. It's got its own way of uploading a dirty URL and changing it to a clean one, and then trying to navigate how that's crawled is a big thing. And so I would say that crawl budget is more of a common challenge with a Magento website than most. We do a lot of Salesforce at the minute, a lot of what was Demandware as well. And that's got its own challenges, particularly someone somewhere in the SEO space said 410s are better than 404s because they get pages to leave the index faster, which I'm sure is technically true. But Demandware or Salesforce has got this weird little quirk where you can't really change your 404 page into anything custom. But you can do that with a 410. So everyone defaults to a 410 on a Demandware platform because they can at least make a nice UX around the 404 page. It's not 404 page, it's a 410 page. But if you are the kind of retailer that gets things out of stock and back into stock, and you're doing 410s on that, then they aren't coming back. So it's worth a little bit of custom development to try and fix a 404 or do something with 301s rather than just assuming that 410's good for SEO, because actually, real double-edged sword.
You don't hear a lot about 410s, to be fair. Not a lot of people, I think, use them, do they?
No. But it was a big thing for a little while. Someone somewhere reported on some SEO website said 410s go out of the index faster, and SEO has agreed being out of the index faster is a good thing, so we should do that.
And everyone's jumping on it. Okay, so I think that's some great real actionable takeaway. I think just what tool would you recommend now, or tools for like crawling now? Obviously, you talked about decrawl back in the day more so, and I know we've used that, ourselves probably about 3 or 4 years ago as well. We don't use it so much ourselves either now. What have you got? Any sort of favorites now for crawling and getting the best out of that crawl?
We're big fans of Sitebulb particularly, and Screaming Frog too. So we made a choice early on at Rise that instead of getting a super expensive cloud crawler, because one of the bigger challenges for cloud crawlers is not how many URLs you crawl, and it's how many sites you can crawl. So when you're an agency, it can be tough to attribute equal love to all of your clients when you've only got 10 clients that you can crawl. So we decided that it would pay for itself in about 4 months if we decided to get a PC that has 48 cores and 96 gig of RAM that sits in the corner and everyone remotes into. And sets the Sitebulb crawl going. We can eat through websites very quickly, and it opens up. When you're not worried about credits and you're not worried about the number of sites you can crawl, it opens up all the possibilities of crawling competitors. And then you've got this comparison of, well, my website's got this problem, but so has everyone else. So I've got context. And you don't do that if you're paying 700 quid a month for Spotify.
No, that's actually a really good point. Like it. So the future. Technical SEO. I think obviously I think we could actually talk about technical SEO for a couple of hours. I think we're just scratching the surface, to be fair. But I think Core Web Vitals seems to be the thing at the moment, and the mail has been for obviously quite a while now, and all these lots of headlines. But what would you say if we're sat here, maybe 18 months from now, Stephen? What should we be looking out for? Where are things going? Maybe on the technical side of SEO.
Headless is the next thing, and so we're seeing a lot more. We tend to work with large retailers who are thinking about this stuff, but my old agency tended to work with Fortune 500s who would have their big legacy clunky thing on their main website, but when they wanted to do a microsite somewhere, when they wanted to launch a new thing, a new brand or something like that, they learned a little while ago that you could do something with Contentful and throw it up very quickly and it would perform really well. So you're getting all of these proof of concepts with the larger companies, the consultancies, and the my old company Kin and Carter, but the Accentures of the world, they're all doing this kind of thing now. I think you can see some really, really big retailers. Gymshark is probably a good example that's using Shopify, but not as you know it.
Yeah.
So I think that there are going to be more and more of these type of, again, coming back to that limitation from a content point of view of some of those platforms. If you can combine the e-commerce engine behind Shopify with the content engine behind WordPress in a way that actually gets the best out of both of those, and it's performant, then people probably will do that a lot more. So I think everyone needs to get comfortable with headless CMS, and what that probably means is JavaScript, and some of the old favorites are still around like React and Vue, but we're seeing a lot of Gatsby now and these kind of new JavaScript frameworks that they're moving on very quickly, and it's a constant learning curve. But I think learning JavaScript frameworks, not to build them, but what are the nuances and what are the usual challenges you get when it's a React website, for example, it's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think I have to admit, a few of the people our partners on the development side, Headless, it seems to be the topic of the day. It's not something I'm that personally familiar with, but I think, I know like BigCommerce, for example. I think Aero in the UK, be a big driver. Yeah, right. So I think we'll park the technical for a moment, and I think what I'm really intrigued about, I know our listeners well. Obviously, obviously our listeners are all about growth, and your company, 2 years and a couple of weeks, is it, or 2 years and a couple of months old?
That's
I
right.
think you're 100 strong, 100 plus people. How would you sum up, how you've managed to create an agency from a standing start in 2 and a bit years, with 100 people? How would you say you've done that?
I would say the things that we did right would firstly be an extremely clear proposition. This is who we're for. This is how we do the things that we do, and a willingness very early on to say no to things that didn't feel like it matched that criteria.
Yeah.
And that was certainly, from a new business, from a client, sales point of view, in the very early days, that kind of, we would qualify out of something if it wasn't right. Now we qualify into something if it is right, and the default is no, because we have a very clear idea of what we do and how much we charge for it, and we don't negotiate that. So that's certainly been a big thing from a sales point of view. It's meant that we have stayed strong on the kind of commercial side of things, and when you get sales right, everything else falls into place. So that's kind of point number one, I would say. Point number two is when we're kind of deciding which types of clients that we would go after, we said, even when there were two of us, massive brands. We want to compete with these kinds of agencies that we've always competed with from our old companies. We should be going for brands like Missguided and Matalan, and that's one of the main contributing factors that we won both of those in the first couple of months, because we felt like we should be doing work for those type of companies. And so what often happens, I think, for startup agencies is they take what they can get, and they don't necessarily aim as high as they potentially could.
Yeah.
So and then it's very hard to get out of your lane once you're in your lane, I think.
Yeah, totally. You see it, don't you? They start at, whether it's £1,000 a month, and they maybe stay there for 10 years or whatever it may be. So very clear proposition of who you will and will not work with, and a very, you sort of pricing yourself in an environment where, it's not, it's priced right, shall we say, it's priced at a price point that attracts it's a certain type of client that you're going to attract with that price point. But obviously it's a very specific offer, but at the same respect, it's a juicy price point. It's a premium price point, as opposed to maybe scratching around at the other end of things. And I think this is so, when we think about e-commerce stores, and the guys that are maybe, they're purely pushing boxes out on price. They're not investing in their brand. They're not investing in their content marketing. There's a market there, but it's a tough game, isn't it?
One of the interesting kind of parallels, I think, with the e-commerce world would be a lot of people who are setting up their own e-com stores are kind of going for a market that's untapped. It's not got a lot of competition in it, but we think it will grow. And that's good. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. What we literally did was we chose a market that was huge and aimed squarely at 10% of it and said, all of these 90% of people are not for us. And you see, the kind of brands like Patagonia who do that from a very kind of brand purpose point of view. But if you are the type of brand if you're the type of company that's aiming at a very large market and purposely alienating most of it because you know that there is a 10% of that market, a 5% of that market that agrees with you and wants to pay the price that you want to charge because they get to do X, Y, and Z that you can enable for them, that 5-10% could be hundreds of millions, billions of pounds if it's a big enough market. And not a lot of companies really do that.
Yeah, I think respect, Stephen. I think, to be able to sort of in effect turn business away because it's not a fit is quite a, it can be quite challenging when you're starting out, isn't it? Obviously I've built an agency, very different from yours, but I'm 12 years in now, and I know we have taken business back in the day, because we've got bills to pay, back in the day sort of thing. We're the same, we turn business away, obviously we're very different agencies, but I think obviously we do get agencies listening to this, and I think that's a great bit of advice. I really think that's a great bit of advice. You sort of have to take some stuff to pay the bills, but you want to be at that point where you're taking work that you can deliver, working with brands that you enjoy, obviously charging a premium or a good rate for it. You're not discounting your work. You're getting paid the market rate or above the market rate, ideally. And good. Yeah, that's really, really, really insightful personally, that. Yeah. So 2 years, now it can't have all been plain sailing, I would imagine, as I run an agency, and some days are tough, and I think some days, there's a lot, you say about 100 plus people, what's your sort of, some of those days where you think, Jesus Christ, what am I doing? How have I gone from, working for Pendragon to having 100 people to think about? What are some of the things that have kept you going, or some of the things that you do to keep you moving, keep you positive, keep you pushing through?
I think a lot of the kind of negative parts of running a business like ours are self-made. So, and one of the things that's important to Rise is being culturally relevant. We work with brands that are talked about all day, every day, and we help them to get talked about all day, every day. Yeah. And we need to accept that when we work with brands that are talked about all day, every day, not everyone says nice things. So when, we are an agency built for the likes of Boohoo Group, we are fast fashion, we are fast everything else. A lot of the time people say mean things about our clients, and that often trickles into mean things about us and mean things about our staff. And so we've got to kind of take the rough with the smooth and remind ourselves that if we are willing to work with brands like this, or not even willing to, but we are designed to, it's our purpose to work with brands like this, then we have to accept that, we can do a certain degree of good in the world with those brands. We can help to improve them. We can use the leverage that they give us, we can use the revenue that they generate with us to do good elsewhere, and we do that from a social point of view with a lot of the other things that we do as well. You've just got to accept that not everyone's going to like you, and that's the tricky bit. So the bad days are often around that. It's the kind of public backlash that we sometimes get, and that's okay. But inside you do feel it, definitely.
You're human after all, aren't you? If somebody says something about you and your brand or your people, you're gonna be like, what the, you don't want it to affect you, and it can sort of wash it over a bit, but still,
Definitely. And I think like the kind of the things when you were asking what keeps us going, like Rise at Seven's purpose, literally our purpose, our mission statement, whatever, is to give people confidence. And so what kind of keeps me going definitely is seeing people who come in at graduate level who get promoted again, who are shouting about the work that they're doing, who are shouting about the work that their colleagues are doing as well. I think one of the most positive things about Rise's culture is no one takes the credit. Everyone gives credit to everyone else. And that is not what I've experienced in previous companies at all. Everyone's shouting, I did this.
Yeah.
And in fact, you get some of that, sure, but they give credit where credit's due as well. So that kind of building of confidence and that collective we're taking on the world kind of mentality, it's infectious. It definitely keeps you going when times are a little bit trickier.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So biggest challenge, if we were to say what is the biggest challenge you've had? Obviously that is hyper growth. I mean, I don't know I haven't got the definition to hand, but 100 people, multi-million pound turnover, in an agency, is crazy. It's not like you're selling cars, or it's very specific industry that I know a lot about, and I know a lot of our listeners will. But what would you say has been the biggest challenge growing? Growing from 0 to 100 and whatever it is must be insane.
It's recruitment, definitely.
Yeah.
Recruitment is the hardest thing. So we have different recruitment challenges at different phases of growth with Rise, definitely. So in the last 18 months, and certainly for the first 6 months of the pandemic, onboarding people remotely has been a learning curve, but we've got very good at it. And we have a new starter every single week, at least, if not more than one a week. So we just got used to that. It's how we do things, and it's fine. It does generate pressure for the teams who are training a lot. Like they're running through the introduction to whatever tool it is probably once every couple of weeks or 3 weeks. So they know those things like the back of their hand, definitely.
Yeah.
But the challenge has now changed to where we've hired 100 people when no one else was hiring people.
Yeah.
We are now defending 100 people who everyone wants to hire.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Trying to hire more people. We've got 32 vacancies at the moment that we want to fill, and so has everyone else. So
it's crazy buoyant, isn't it? Just the whole industry. Every other LinkedIn post from agency owner, hiring again, hiring. Same here. We all sorts of hiring going on. So obviously, getting 100 people or recruiting but retaining, or defending, as you put it, which I really like that. So how are you defending? Why are people staying with Rise at 7? Why do they want to stay? What are you doing? And I think the specifics is what you're doing to make them stay. But what would you say to our listeners that I think there's obviously a lot of hyper growth, and a lot of e-commerce has done extremely well this last 12, 18 months. Talent, is getting harder to win, if you like. So to retain them, what are you doing? What would you recommend to our listeners to retain teams?
So I'm going to put a warning on this before I say it, but know who you are and tell everyone who you're not is a big thing for us. And the reason I give that a warning is we do lose staff, because there are people who have kind of come into Rise and I think probably had a good time and worked hard and done some really great things, but now the world is their oyster. They have other things that they want to do. So we are very clear. We're an office first business. That doesn't mean 5 days a week in the office. It means that somewhere at some point, we would like you to give FaceTime to whoever you work with.
Yeah.
It's not mandated by the board. I don't know when anyone is in. I genuinely don't know when anyone is in, but
they're not checking in and out sort of thing. Yeah. Officially. It's
more a case of, if you believe that you enjoy the social aspects of work and you are the type of person that's social, because lots of people that aren't, there'll certainly be people listening to this podcast who are grateful that they don't have to do the social bit anymore.
Yeah.
And probably those people wouldn't work at Rise at 7 or wouldn't want to work at Rise. And so that kind of thing where you're really clear, these are the things that we're about. And, going back to values and particularly purpose, about giving people confidence, we have a concerted effort constantly to build people up, to make sure that they feel great, that they feel like they walk around Brighton SEO at Rise at 7 and think that they are, the best agency on the planet. That's huge for us. And so, a lot of our benefits come into that. So things like we've got a coaching program where you can get unlimited coaching around, parenting or work or relationships or whatever it might be, because we want you to feel confident in yourself, who you are as a human being.
Yeah.
So kind of tying everything into who you are is very important. I know that sounds all very brand purposey, but it's really just how are we going to prioritize when there are certainly agencies around here who will pay way over the odds for people right now, and stretch themselves really thin to be able to do it.
Yeah.
How do we make it so that everyone feels like at the very least they're paid what's fair? They get a good wage, and the reason that they leave is not money.
Yeah.
Everyone at Rise at 7, everyone at every agency in the country right now could leave for more money if they wanted to.
Yeah, I agree.
Because there's so much money around for those people.
Yeah.
But if that's the one motivating factor for them, they're probably not going to be a good fit. Most agencies in the country.
Not the right agency. Well, they're there. I don't want them.
So it's like, how do you make it so our job as agency owners is how do you take the money conversation off the table so everyone feels that they're compensated fairly, and it's all of the other things that they make their decision based on: the culture, the training, the progression opportunities, their perks, whatever it might be, but the things that they feel are important to them. And they've got that feeling, that trust that you pay them well.
I'd imagine you've had to move pretty quick with that, because obviously it's that growth. Obviously, we keep referring back to this 100, but obviously in, out, in, out, probably, and then it's hang on a minute. Obviously, you've got to get the fundamentals of those building blocks, that culture piece, so right. But if you're moving as quick as you have been, would you say that maybe you made quite a few mistakes with that in the early year, maybe or so?
Definitely still make mistakes. Yeah. There's loads, and there's all these things that are bubbling away in the back of my mind as being problems. I'm trying to determine, firstly, are they a problem for everyone? Because something that someone hates might be something that someone really likes. So things like internal comms, like we shut down our WhatsApp group. We made it so that Slack is not inaccessible, but there's no notifications from Slack between 5:30 and 9 a.m. We are, we've chosen a project management software that you can't get on your phone to try and give people that work-life balance. But the problem becomes: are we going far enough, or are we going too far? Are we limiting people what they do? Or I'm always of the opinion that if it was just up to me, I would get rid of Slack completely. I think it's awful. But I know that, when we did the last survey around how people feel about our IT generally, and Slack was a conversation, lots of people say, I am overwhelmed by the amount of communication, but 85% of people said, I believe Slack is 100% necessary. So it's like, well, it becomes not a question of how do you solve that problem, but how do you mitigate the problem?
Yeah, maybe reduce where you can, sort of thing.
For sure.
Yeah, great. Well, Stephen, it has been an absolute pleasure. I have a feeling this could go on to be the longest podcast episode of all time, but I will be very respectful of your time. So what would you say is the future for Rise at 7?
World domination.
Have you got a white cat on your knee?
Yeah, well, what we've done in the UK so far, we want to replicate that in the US, and we're very much a UK and US agency. We do work in Europe, but we don't plan on getting a real foothold in Europe. I don't think it's just too complicated at the moment, but we'd certainly like to replicate our growth in the UK, in the US. And more of it. Like there are big brands out there that don't work with us just yet, so we want those, and want to continue to grow for the time being, at least, as well.
Yeah. So you're just getting started, literally, aren't you?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So 2 years, I'm going to get you back on. We'll have a check-in. Yeah.
Love to. Yeah. Love to.
You'll probably be dialing in from your villa in Bahamas or whatever.
Oh, I wish.
So I always like to end every episode on a book recommendation. What book would you recommend to our listeners?
So I think going back to the conversation around some of the things that have been tough, I would say the best book on leadership that I have ever read is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz.
Yeah.
And I think he really popularized the concept of peacetime CEO versus wartime CEO, but that whole book it's a story. It's not a business book that's like a manual or difficult to read. The audiobook, in fact, on Audible is fantastic. Like the narration really kind of brings it to life as well. So I would say if you are a company owner of any description or have ever previously been or would like to be, that is probably the best book that I've ever read around leadership and kind of what it takes to do that.
That is the third time that has been recommended to me. So I have to admit, I've not pressed the button. So I'm going to have to get that one sorted. But thanks so much for being on the show. To the listeners that want to reach out to you, find out more about you, more about Rise, what's the best way to do that?
Probably Twitter. Very active on Twitter, so you can grab me. DMs are open. Happy to chat.
Yeah, lovely. Well, thanks again, Stephen. I look forward to seeing you in 2 years.
Exactly. Like.